Chief Executive John Lee condemns U.S. lawmakers who want to impose sanctions on Hong Kong officials and judges. Israel forces attack an ambulance in Gaza. Over 100 people died in earthquake in Nepal. Good evening and welcome to TVB News. Chief Executive John Lee today condemned U.S. lawmakers who want to impose sanctions on more Hong Kong officials and judicial officers. He said such acts are equivalent to threatening judges and was perverting the course of justice. Prior to departing for Shanghai this morning, Chief Executive John Lee responded to some U.S. politicians who proposed a bill that would impose sanctions on senior Hong Kong officials and judges. Lee said these people are clearly trying to threaten judges and interfere with their work in hearing cases fairly and impartially in a bid to influence their judgment, amounting to perverting the course of justice. He added it also violates the principle of judicial independence that the U.S. claims is protected by its constitution. Still, Lee believes the judges, prosecutors and officials in Hong Kong will carry out their duties without fear. He also called the U.S. politicians despicable and hypocritical. On another note, the CE said he did receive an invitation to attend the APEC summit, set to be held in mid-November in San Francisco. He said because of scheduling reasons, Financial Secretary Paul Chan will attend on his behalf, adding such arrangements have precedence. Meanwhile, speaking on a radio program, Secretary for Justice Paul Lam, who was among the list of people drawn up by those U.S. politicians, says the SAR will not be bullied. He added the politicians even targeted retired judges as well as barristers hired to represent Hong Kong. Lam added their behavior is aimed at intimidating judicial workers, trying to instill fear over taking up government employment. He said it is being done with malicious intent. Secretary for Justice Paul Lam said it is essential that the government does a proper job when conducting legislation work for Article 23 of the Basic Law. Lam's remarks came after the latest policy address said legislation must be completed by next year. Memo Sengai reports.
Speaking on a radio program today, Secretary for Justice Paul Lam stressed the significance of legislation for Article 23 of the Basic Law. Lam described the legislation as a constitutional obligation that has become a piece of missing homework and an old debt of the SAR after repeated delays by the government. However, Lam said the law will not be harsher because the purpose of the legislation is protection and not punishment. Meanwhile, Lam said authorities will study the inclusion of espionage offences in Article 23. Despite the late submission, the Justice Secretary vowed to deliver a well-written and effective homework. Lam said discussion sessions will be held in the future, allowing the public and authorities to exchange views on the topics. Memos 9, TVB News.
Police arrested 2 more women in the case of a suspected Mycobacterium abscessus infection cluster breaking out at a beauty salon. A total of 4 women have now been arrested. Police said the 2 women were arrested on Friday, with one of them being a senior employee at the Gals Glam Beauty, where the infection cluster broke out. The 2 were arrested on suspicion of unlicensed medical practices. Up until today, the Center for Health Protection said 16 women suffered symptoms such as skin redness and rashes after receiving injections at the salon's 3 premises. The CHP urges individuals who experienced such symptoms to seek medical treatment and dial the hotline immediately. A mass was held this afternoon in honor of the elevation of Bishop Stephen Chow to the cardinalate. The concelebrated mass invoking God's blessing was held at the Catholic Cathedral on Cane Road and was attended by hundreds of church members. They include former Chief Executive Carrie Lam. Chow visited Beijing in April this year. After the Mass, Chow said Beijing Archbishop Joseph Li Shan will visit Hong Kong in return on November 14th. Chow also said his duty is to strengthen the communication between China and the Vatican, adding that there is no hostility from either side. As the Gay Games Hong Kong 2023 got underway, protesters gathered outside the venue. Security was stepped up near the Queen Elizabeth Stadium in Wan Chai, where the opening ceremony was held. The event will run for 8 days. Convener of the Executive Council, Regina Ip, who officiated at the ceremony, says it shows the city's diversity and inclusivity.
Equal opportunity and non-discrimination are highly treasured by our government and our people. These values are borne out by the numerous judgments which our independent courts have handed down in the past decade.
The ceremony was attended by representatives from 40 countries and regions. Still, there were protests outside the stadium objecting to the event being held in Hong Kong. They criticized the organizers for promoting same-sex marriages and destroying traditional family values. Gary Chan, chairman of the Democratic Alliance for the Betterment and Progress of Hong Kong, respects the participants but opposes to making same-sex marriage lawful. Meanwhile, Bishop Stephen Chow said Hong Kong has been an inclusive society and there should be room and space for everybody. Overseas, as Israel continues to attack Gaza City, at least one ambulance was hit by an Israeli airstrike near the Al-Shifa hospital. The director of that medical facility claims another blast killed 15 and wounded dozens at UN school sheltering refugees. The IDF say they were targeting Hamas. The United Nations on the ground in the Gaza Strip painted a desperate picture for civilians as the war continues. David Garrett reports.
As the war heads into a second month with no end in sight, smoke billows across the border as Israel continues strikes on Gaza. The latest escalation is the worst in the region in generations. 4 weeks ago, Hamas attacked Israel, killing 1,400 people. In response, Israel's onslaught shows no signs of diminishing. According to the Palestinian Red Crescent, the latest civilians caught up in the fighting were part of a medical convoy near the Al-Shifa hospital in Gaza City. Their footage shows a smashed-up, blood-stained ambulance. More footage shot after the explosion showed people trying to get to the injured in a crowded, chaotic, desperate scene. Israel say the ambulance carried weapons.
Essentially, there were people just lying, very badly injured people lying on the floor of the ambulances. The triage at the back of the ambulance was who's dead, who's alive. Those who were alive with horrific blast injuries, burn injuries, were taken into an already overwhelmed emergency department.
In a separate bombing further south, at least 5 were dead. Bodies were brought into a clinic with the injured. Women and the very young were filmed being treated. Crowds gathered around the hospital as anger spread. These images and others in recent days prompted the Organisation of Islamic Cooperation to speak at the UN.
Why is there double standards? Why is the message different when the Ukraine conflict happened? That's a question that the world is asking. Therefore, today, it's time to work together to save lives. There's no justification to bomb refugee camps like Jabalia twice. There's no justification to target hospitals under what's so-called the right to defend.
The United Nations says the humanitarian situation in Gaza is worsening. Thousands are clinging to survival.
We took our Commissioner General, Philippe Lazzarini, into one of the internally displaced centres the other day, and everybody was pointing to their mouth and saying, Maya, Maya, water, water.
Explosions in various locations around Gaza. Israel's military says it has killed more than 20 Hamas commanders. They released pictures of troops encircling Gaza City and engaging in operations in the Strip. More than 20 IDF service personnel have died since the war began. David Garrett, TVB News.
Indonesia, the world's most populous Muslim country, has sent its first batch of humanitarian aid to Gaza. Indonesian President Joko Widodo today released 51 tons of aid that included food and medical supplies for the Palestinian enclave. The supplies were provided by the government and humanitarian organizations in Indonesia. Widodo, speaking at an air base where the aid was being loaded onto an aircraft headed for Egypt, said the assistance was a form of solidarity with the struggle of the Palestinian people. Indonesia has regularly expressed support for Palestinian statehood, and large pro-Palestinian protests have broken out since October 7th. The death toll from the Nepal earthquake has reached at least 128 and is expected to rise. The government is assessing the damage following the tremor that hit the west of the country. Many buildings have been destroyed. Rescue teams have started to search through the rubble. Some houses destroyed were not built to withstand an earthquake. The epicenter was about 500 kilometers west of Kathmandu. Communications to the remote region are cut off. Landslides caused by the quake have blocked roads, making it even more difficult for the military to reach those in need. The U.S. Geological Survey put the earthquake at a magnitude of 5.6. At the regional hospital in Nepalgunj, hundreds of beds have already been filled. Still to come on tonight's news. Australia Prime Minister says he wants to stabilise relations with China ahead of visit. Housing Secretary says a task force is working to solve problems involving subdivided flats. China's first homemade cruise ship is delivered. Welcome back to TVB News. Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese is embarking on a 4-day visit to China starting today. He said he was looking forward to meeting President Xi Jinping. Mimosa Ngai reports.
Anthony Albanese becomes the first Australian Prime Minister to visit China after a 7-year hiatus. During his trip, the Australian leader will visit Beijing and Shanghai and will attend the 6th China International Import Expo. Speaking before his departure, Albanese highlighted the importance of maintaining a stable relationship with China.
We should cooperate with China where we can, disagree where we must, and engage in our national interests. It is in Australia's national interest to make sure that we have that engagement and dialogue, which is always positive, which is always good.
The Prime Minister also said it will mention the detained Australian blogger Yang Hanzhong during his visit. Yang is jailed in Beijing over espionage charges.
Dr. Yang's case needs to be resolved, and I'll be speaking about his human rights, the nature of the detention and the failure to have transparent processes. Just as we stood up, I've raised this issue before, we will always raise.
Meanwhile, Beijing's Foreign Ministry spokesperson Wang Wenbin said China is willing to improve and develop a healthy and stable relationship with Australia. Minus 9, TVB News.
Chief Executive John Lee has arrived in Shanghai for the China International Import Expo, which kicks off tomorrow. Chief Executive John Lee's itinerary in Shanghai today began with a meeting at a hotel involving some 150 Hong Kongers and enterprises. The CE was accompanied by Financial Secretary Paul Chan, as well as Secretary for Commerce and Economic Development Algernon Yao. Andrew Yao, founder of the Hong Kong-Shanghai Alliance, said John Lee mentioned how he missed Shanghai. He said Lee told them Shanghai is a vibrant city and that Hong Kong and Shanghai have a lot in common, particularly in the financial and technology areas. Lee also introduced his latest policy blueprint to them, which included policies to enhance the integration of Hong Kong with the mainland. He also called on them to come back to Hong Kong next month to vote in the district council elections. Lee then met with the mayor of Shanghai, Gong Zheng, and presided over the signing of 5 new cooperation agreements between Hong Kong and Shanghai. The delegation then paid a visit to a Hong Kong-funded private hospital in Changning District. The facility began operations in 2004 and boasts medical teams from around the world. On Sunday, the CE will attend the opening ceremony of the Import Expo. Earlier, Lee promised to visit the booths of Hong Kong enterprises at the Hong Kong exhibition area to show his support. The chief executive will also deliver speeches at the Invest in China Year Summit, as well as a seminar on revitalizing real economy with financial resources to promote the city's status as a global financial hub. He will head back to the city on Monday. The chief executive had earlier announced the setting up of a task force on tackling the issue of subdivided units in his policy address. The task force has convened its first meeting. Vice Chairman of the group, Housing Secretary Winnie Ho, said the problem with subdivided flats is complicated and authorities should not rush for a solution. She said the team will first collect opinions on how to define substandard subdivided flats. Another key task is to eradicate substandard flats. Ho stressed that does not mean people will lose their homes. Instead, this will give homeowners the opportunity and time to improve the flats. China's first home-built cruise was delivered to Shanghai today. The mainland-built cruise is called Adora Magic City, which is over 300 meters long and can accommodate up to 5,200 passengers in over 2,000 rooms. The vessel contains multiple facilities for its guests, including a water park, a theater, and a shopping mall. The cruise is scheduled to depart Shanghai on January 1st. The United Nations Human Rights Committee said it was disturbed by U.S. legislation that limit people's legal abortion and voting rights. The committee issued its findings on 6 countries, including the United States. It added it was disturbed by the increase in state-level legislation and barriers that impede women's access to safe and legal abortion. This is being done by the criminalization of healthcare providers, family members, and pregnant women themselves. That's the news. Thanks for watching.